Hello, and welcome to my channel, Reading Little Blue Books Out Loud. This is a little blue book. It just happens to be Little Blue Book number 171, and it is titled, Has Life Any Meaning? A Debate. Frank Harris and Percy Ward. Now, this is the first time I will read one of these little blue books that is actually a debate. There are several of them, this being one of them. Now, this is a debate that took place in 1920. It was a public debate on the question, has life any meaning? In the affirmative was Frank Harris, the man Shakespeare, Oscar Wilde, his life and confessions, etc. The negative point, Percy Ward, lecturer of the Rationalist Educational Society. This debate took place Sunday, April 11th, 1920, in Kimball Hall, Chicago. Stereographic report by McClaskey and McClaskey, Shorthand Reporters, Chicago. And we'll begin. Has life any meaning? A debate. Percy Ward's first speech. Fellow sufferers. Schopenhauer, the great German philosopher, said that the right form of address between man and man is not "sir" and the like, but "my fellow sufferer." Acting upon the profound philosopher's suggestion, I begin my speech by addressing you as fellow sufferers. In that sympathetic phrase I include, of course, our excellent chairman and my distinguished friend, the enemy, Mr. Frank Harris. A story is told about two Irishmen who were walking down the Strand in London. They noticed a cripple sitting on the sidewalk, blind and deaf, his legs missing, his arms gone. A card attached to the cripple's coat stated that he was an English working man and had suffered these injuries in a factory explosion. One of the Irishmen slipped a shilling into the cripple's cap. The other asked, "Why did you do that for? Don't you see that he's an Englishman? The English are the arch foes of Ireland, and yet you gave that cripple, an Englishman, a shilling." Said the other, "That's so, but he is the first Englishman I ever saw trimmed to suit me." Frank Harris was born in Ireland. I had the misfortune to be born in England, and it is a misfortune to be born in England, or anywhere else. Now, an Irishman's idea of heaven is a chance to trim an Englishman. I am not satisfied with marrying an Irish lady. I tempt fate by engaging in a debate with an Irish gentleman who can wield an intellectual shillelagh more effectively than any other living son of Erin. My friends must think I am greedy for punishment. Mark Twain, in a letter to a clergyman, said that when a man is a pessimist before 48, he knows too much, and if he is an optimist after 48, he knows too little. Now, I do not like to label myself like a pot of jam or a jar of pickles, but I may say that I am not an optimist, and I do hope it is not necessary to inform you that I am not 48. An ex-Christian Scientist was once asked why he had become a backslider or on-Christian, on-scientific. He confessed that he was tired of being so damned happy all the time. I think we need some good doses of pessimism to make life interesting after the monotony of optimism. Has life any meaning? Judging by the size of this audience, there is evidently some doubt about the question. I trust we shall answer it to your satisfaction. My case this morning rests upon three questions. First, how can life have any meaning at all, when all living things, along with the world on which we live, are doomed to death and destruction? Second, What meaning can there be to life when its dominant law is age-long and worldwide struggle for existence? And third, what possible meaning can there be to life when the chief experience of living things is suffering and pain? My whole case is based on these three questions. If, in my second and third speeches, I find myself up against it, I shall keep repeating these three questions. Astronomers are pretty certain that the destruction of our Earth is inevitable. Our globe has not always existed, and it will not always exist. We learn from astronomical science that this tiny ball in which we live, which, like a moth in the universal ether, flies around the candle of the sun, will some day perish and be as if it had never been. The moon is a dead world, one of countless dead worlds in the cemetery of space. The moon is the skeleton at our feast. It holds up to our eyes the fate of our planet. It is made of the same material as our Earth. It was originally part of our Earth. Because of its smaller size, it cooled off faster than its mother Earth. Someday our Earth will become as the moon, the corpse of a world. Astronomers tell us that beyond any question, all life on our planet is destined to come to an end by the extinction of the sun. The sun is continually radiating a stupendous amount of light and heat into space. It has done so for millions of years and may go on doing so for millions of years. But it cannot go on doing so forever. Although the quantity go But it cannot go okay. Although the quantity of heat in the sun is very great, it is not endless. The sun is growing smaller year by year. It has been calculated that the diameter of the sun is shrinking about 250 feet every year. Now, it is a certain conclusion that the sun must gradually cool. The heat sent by the sun to our earth will someday cease. When the sun has cooled to a certain extent, it will cease to give the earth sufficient light and sufficient heat. The terrible coldness of icy space will some day enwrap the earth. The earth eventually will become frozen to the core. And human life, all life, will be forever wiped off the face of the planet. This is the prophecy of science regarding the doom of man and his world. Many attempts have been made to visualize the final cataclysm. A grim picture of the destiny of the earth has been painted by Camille Flammarion, the eminent French astronomer. He writes, "From the summit of the mountains, the mantle of the snows will be spread over the valleys, driving before it both life and civilization. New York, London, Paris, Berlin, Vienna, Constantinople, Rome would successively sleep under the eternal snows. Such towns would then be only arid deserts, split with fissures much more terrible than the solitudes of those polar regions at present known to us. The last representatives of the human race will come and explore on the shores of the last remaining equatorial sea, beneath the rays of a feeble sun that from henceforth will only light a moving tomb that shall turn again and again around a light-giving but insufficient heat. At this epoch our planet would have reached a temperature approximating to 273 degrees below zero. In 10 million years the great body of the earth, worn-aged, sterile, and solitary, will bear on its dried surface the ruins of its brilliant past." No one has matched Shakespeare's sublime utterance in the familiar passage: "Our revels now are ended, these our actors, as I foretold you, were all spirits, and are melted into air, into thin air. And like the baseless fabric of this vision, the cloud-capped towers, the gorgeous palaces, the solemn temples, the great globe itself, yea, all which it inhabits shall dissolve, and like this insubstantial pageant faded, leave not a rack behind." The stage of human life, with all its tragedies and comedies, with all its laughter and all its tears, with all its sorrows and all its joys, with all the achievements of science and of civilization, with all the beauties of nature and of art, will some day vanish like a dream. Now nearly all the regions, no, Now nearly all the religions of the world admit that this life is not worthwhile, that this life has no meaning at all, unless there is for man a life after death in which he is to be compensated for his sufferings in the present life. Consider then the belief in the individual immortality of man in the light of the revelations of astronomy. Death is the law of the universe, yet man, proud man, dressed in a little brief authority, most ignorant of what he's most assured, is so conceited as to imagine that he is the one and only form of existence in the infinite universe that is an exception to the universal law of death. It is to laugh. My gifted friend John Emerson Roberts has eloquently said, pardon me, how splendidly audacious is man's hope of immortality, man dreaming that he shall live forever. Yesterday he was not, yet believes he will be tomorrow, without a past, yet claiming an everlasting future for his own. Commend me to the superb audacity of the human soul that has dared to frame so colossal a dream of things. Planets age, decay, and pass away. Continents themselves crumble. Mountains corrode. The grand bulwarks of the sea are worn by waves and fetid by the tooth of time. Worlds themselves grow old. Stars die and perish. Suns burn out their ceaseless fires, and the galaxies of heaven know them no more. Yet man, a thing of dust, a breath, a passing spectre, a bubble on the boundless sea, infinitesimal man, dreams of life everlasting. Death, he says, shall not be death to him. He will rise and pass on and on, youthful and joyous, jocund and free, forever and forever. The dreamer, assuming the qualities of the sun, the infinite claiming infinity, dust defying death, the molecule making itself God, the meanest saying, I am eternity. Such is man, who lays to his soul the flattering unction that we shall live forever. Can audacity go further? With what immeasurable egotism is man's best hope won? Can arrogance, pride, and vulgarity transcend such appalling impertinence? I ask my friend Foreman, therefore, in view of the fact that death is the doom of man and the doom of his world, what is the significance of human life? What does it mean? My answer, in the words of Goldberg, the cartoonist, is, it doesn't mean anything. Now I come to my second question. What meaning can there be to life when its dominant law is age-long, worldwide struggle for existence? Is natural selection a process which has any meaning? Is natural selection a plan which you can imagine was designed by intelligence and benevolence? For countless ages our world has been a vast battlefield. Nature has produced more organisms than can find room and food. The result of this profligate increase of life has been a universal and ceaseless struggle for existence. Life has been a perpetual warfare of animal against animal, with no mercy to the vanquished. By means of this struggle for existence, the weakest are crushed out, and the fittest, or fitter, survive, to propagate their race. Only by this ceaseless strife and slaying has life maintained itself. The essential condition for the conservation of any life is the destruction of many other lives. In this universe, the eternal strife, each makes war with the rest to win. I ask my distinguished opponent, is there any meaning, any purpose, any sense in this pitiless ceaseless struggle, which is the supreme law of all life? This evolution of living things brought about by devilish cruelty and bloody competition brings into plainest relief the utter meaninglessness of life. If any God deliberately designed that organic evolution should be in a process of excruciating suffering, awful agony, and merciless slaughter, then such a God is either infinitely bad or infinitely mad. Such a God is either an almighty criminal or an almighty lunatic. George Bernard Shaw says in The Man and Superman, "The imagination cannot conceive a viler criminal than he who should build another London like the present one, nor a greater benefactor than he who should destroy it." Now, I want to improve upon George Bernard Shaw. I often improve upon God, so why not on George Bernard Shaw? I would not attempt to improve upon Frank Harris. That would be an impossibility. But I would improve upon Shaw and say, "The imagination cannot conceive a viler criminal than he who should create another world like the present one, nor a greater benefactor than he who should destroy it." Now I come to my third question. What possible meaning can there be to life when the chief experience of living beings is suffering and pain? The facts of daily human experience all witness to the reign of nonsense in human life. This unintelligible world is a theater of misery. Schopenhauer says, "If a God has made this world, I would not like to be that God. The misery of the world would break my heart." What does life mean to the majority of men and women? What are they living for? Think of the wearisome occupations which slay personality and make human life a vanity. I invite Mr. Frank Harris to consider Ingersoll's indictment of modern civilization. In the days of savagery, the strong devoured the weak, actually ate their flesh. In spite of all the laws that man has made, in spite of all advance in science, literature, and art, the strong, the cunning, the heartless still live on the weak, the unfortunate and foolish. True, they do not eat their flesh, they do not drink their blood, but they live on their labor, on their self-denial, their weakness and want. The poor man who deforms himself by toil, who labors for wife and child through all his anxious, barren, wasted life, who goes to the grave without even having one luxury, has been the food of others. He has been devoured by his fellow man. The poor woman living in the bare and lonely room, cheerless and fireless, sewing night and day to keep starvation from a child, is slowly being eaten by her fellow men. When I take into consideration the agony of civilized life, the number of failures, the poverty, the anxiety, the tears, the withered hopes, the bitter realities, the hunger, the crime, the humiliation, the shame, I am almost forced to say that cannibalism, after all, is the most merciful form in which man has ever lived upon his fellow man. Frank Harris's first speech. And I tell you what, I think we'll end there. That's 19 minutes of reading, and I'll come back in part 2 with Frank Harris's first speech, the rebuttal. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in part 2.